A very good evening to you. This is First News. I'm Temba Obe. The government has ordered that mayors and chairpersons of municipal and rural councils must be elected members of the councils. This directive follows the nomination by the MDC-T of individuals who are not elected members of the councils in Harare, Bulawayo and Chitungwiza for the position of mayor. The MDC-T has filed an urgent application in the Electoral Court to compel Ignatius Chombo, Minister of Local Government, Rural and Urban Development, to allow non-councillors to be elected mayors. The case will be argued tomorrow.
We are going to court because the ZANU-PF Minister Ignatius Chombo has now said that mayors must be from elected councillors, when the law is very, very clear in terms of Section 272 of the Constitution. The mayor must be elected by the councillors on the first sitting. And in terms of Section 49 and Section 103 of the Urban Councils Act as amended, the mayor must be elected from a person who is either a councillor or any other person. Any other person means any other person other than a councillor.
However, constitutional lawyer Professor Love Momatuku said the MDC-T has erred in its reading of the Constitution.
The position is very clear in terms of the Constitution. Section 265, subsection 2 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe says that every member of a local authority must be elected by registered voters, which means that you must be a councillor, and only councillors among themselves can allocate roles for different roles, one of the roles being the role of being a mayor.
The possibility of injustice happening to us again does not deter us from pursuing what we think is right. The law is very, very clear. ZANU-PF cannot try to manipulate the law to disadvantage the MDC. So the fact that the courts have not ruled in our favor before is no good reason why we cannot approach the same courts.
Each time that you see the MDC rushing to the courts, it's not because there's any merit in the case that they're taking to the court, but they use the courts as a campaigning platform. So in this case, they had made an error in going around the country appointing persons to be elected mayors who were not qualified in terms of the Constitution. So this is an attempt to cover up for their incompetence of not having read the Constitution in the first place.
Human Rights Watch has sent an open letter to President Robert Mugabe urging him to prioritize human rights in Zimbabwe in the coming 5 years and to decisively honor the country's human rights obligations. We have more about the open letter from Ms. Tisekele Kasambale, the Southern African Director for the organization.
Yes, I think some of the points that we've made and some of the steps that we think the new government, when it's eventually put in place, can take include reaffirming rights provisions which have been highlighted in Zimbabwe's new constitution. And we would like to see the government of Zimbabwe look towards immediately amending or repealing a number of laws such as AIPA and POSA and bringing them in line with the provisions of the new constitution, which certainly looks towards the realization of human rights in numerous ways, including the rights to freedom of expression, association and assembly, etc. So as a first step, we want to see the government reaffirm these provisions in its new constitution and bring old laws in line with the new constitution. We're also calling on President Mugabe and his government to uphold the rights of civil society and human rights defenders. In the past 10 years or so of Zimbabwe's political crisis, we have seen widespread harassment and intimidation, as well as arbitrary arrests of human rights activists, human rights defenders, and those who criticize Mugabe's government. We would like them to see them change this position and to send a clear message that the administration will honor the human rights obligations and not interfere with the rights and the operations of civil society organizations. We're also looking at accountability for past human rights abuses. As you know, impunity has been a major issue in Zimbabwe, where those that have committed widespread violations have gotten away scot-free and have not been brought to account. And would like to see the government address this issue. We also want them to protect media freedom, which have not always been guaranteed in Zimbabwe. and for the new government to carry out policies that actually encourage and not prohibit or weaken freedom of the press in Zimbabwe. Finally, we're calling on them to strengthen the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, which was established over a year ago. We would like to see the work of this Human Rights Commission strengthened and its mandate expanded to include investigations into abuses that were committed before February 2009. We would like to also see them ensure that they hire independent people to the commission, those who can actually independently carry out their mandate. And finally, we hope that the government of Zimbabwe will ensure that the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission actually has the resources to carry out its work. So those are the main, I think it's about 5 priority areas that we'd like to see the government address.
This week, SADC issued its final report on last month's elections in Zimbabwe, which declared the election free and credible and said it reflected the will of the people. The report has been widely criticized by the opposition and civil society organizations for glossing over shortcomings in the process. In particular, they mention that until now, Zimbabwe Election Commission has failed to provide, as required by law, an electronic copy of the voters' roll to opposition parties. I asked Ozias Tungwarara, the director of the African Governance, Monitoring and Advocacy Project, if the weaknesses in the SADC Observer Mission report will have a knock-on effect on the rest of the region.
This will be a lowering of the bar that can be seen being applied across the region. Because now, if the same happens in the upcoming elections in Malawi or Mozambique, there will be no basis for SADC as a regional body to critique those elections, because already we are approaching it from the lowest common denominator sort of basis, the lowest hanging fruit. And that doesn't augur well for consolidating the democratic gains that we thought SADC had been making in terms of developing electoral standards, in terms of wanting to apply these, and now receding and clawing back on the very same standards that SADC had set for itself. I think it's a retrogression, to say the least.
Meanwhile, following a visit to his party's Deputy National Chairman, Morgan Komichi, at Chikurubi Prison, MDCT President Morgan Tsvangirai criticized the SADC report, but said he would continue to engage with the regional body.
I'm actually disappointed that certain narratives that are coming out of the report indicate a ZANU-PF narrative. For instance, how does a report, an observer, talk about pirate radios? How do you talk about sanctions, and that the opposition is claiming is campaigning for sanctions, and that's why they lost the election? So I think there's nothing new. They've endorsed. This is a mere endorsement of what they initially endorsed. So there's nothing surprising.
So where to MDC in terms of the diplomatic challenge? You had said that's one of your...
we will be visiting them. We will be visiting the chairman of SADC, the chairman of the Troika, the facilitator, just to say perhaps you arrived at this conclusion erroneously. Whether they are going to review it, that's neither here nor there. But what I want to do is to engage SADC. We can't avoid engaging SADC on the facts, on the ground.
In international news, United States President Barack Obama stopped over in Sweden for bilateral talks with Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt, which focused on Syria, trade, the Arctic, and Russia. From Sweden, the U.S. leader travels to Russia for the G20 summit. Mr. Obama is seeking legislative approval for the limited punitive strikes on Syria for alleged use of chemical weapons. Secretary of State John Kerry made his case in the U.S. Senate yesterday.
The choice we make here will be not just to this question of Syria, but to the support we may or may not anticipate in the Mideast peace process, to the future of Egypt, to the transformation of the Middle East, to the stability of the region and other interests that we have. There's no way to separate one thing from all of the rest.
Mr. Kerry goes to the House of Representatives later today. But a poll released yesterday showed Obama has failed to convince most Americans of the need for a military strike in Syria. Some 56% of those surveyed say the United States should not intervene in Syria, while only 19% favored action, the online poll found. Meanwhile, in Damascus, the Syrian Women's Union held a sit-in at the United Nations headquarters to protest a potential strike by the U.S. against Syria. Majida Kuitet, the head of the union, said they would face any aggression and not allow attacks against Syrian sovereignty. In sport this evening, Zimbabwe have taken a narrow lead after bowling out Pakistan for 249 runs. At close of play today, Zimbabwe were 281 for 7, leading by 32 runs. And that ends the bulletin for tonight. On behalf of the news team, I wish you pleasant viewing on First TV, your nation, your station.